Imagine being dragged out of a car dropped in the middle of the woods. No wheelchair, no phone, and hearing your own mother say, "I'll come back when you stop making everything about you." What she didn't know was that someone was already watching, and what they saw would change everything. This isn't just a story about survival, it's about reclaiming the truth they tried to erase. Stay with me. The trees looked like bones, tall, bare, and brittle, stretching toward a sky that had forgotten how to be blue. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called out. Once, then, silence. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, the kind that wraps around your neck and waits. I sat in the passenger seat of my mother's Jeep Cherokee, my legs aching from cold, my fingers tucked underneath my thighs for warmth. There was no heater running. She hadn't turned it on and I hadn't asked. I learned a long time ago that asking for comfort was like asking a wound not to hurt Gloria Walsh. My mother gripped the steering wheel like it had done something wrong. Her knuckles were white, her jaw locked so tight I could hear the soft grind of her teeth even over the dead radio. She hadn't spoken since we left town. She didn't need to. The silence spoke fluently between us. "Where are we going?" I asked, the words thin and dry, like I'd borrowed someone else's voice. I tried to make it sound casual, like I hadn't already begun cataloging the red flags, the detour past the last gas station, the absence of our usual tension-breaking music, the look in her eyes that reminded me of when she used to slam doors instead of finish arguments. "It's a surprise," she said flatly, then added without looking at me. "Trust me." Those two words hit like spit in winter, sharp, unwanted, and quick to freeze. We drove deeper into the woods. Cell service had vanished miles ago, along with the yellow lines on the road. Pines stood like watchmen on either side, tall and unwelcoming. I knew these back roads. My father used to take me fishing out here before he disappeared from our story. Like so many other things, I wasn't allowed to keep. When the tires crunched gravel and the Jeep jolted off the main road onto a path barely wide enough for one vehicle, something inside me began to hum a deep, primal buzz under my ribs. My leg twitched, the one that never healed properly after the accident, the one that made me high maintenance, slow a lifetime of copays, as Gloria once described me after a third glass of wine. She stopped the car. Abrupt, brutal. The kind of stop that told you the ride was over whether you were ready or not. I barely had time to unclick my seatbelt before she was at my door opening it with the kind of force that made my breath hitch. Without a word, she reached in and yanked me from the seat. My right leg buckled, twisted beneath me. Pain shot up my spine like lightning, fast and blinding. "What are you doing?" I cried, trying to catch myself on the edge of the seat. Gloria dropped a canvas duffel onto the dirt beside me like a grocery bag she'd forgotten to unpack. Then, with a voice cold enough to make the trees lean back, she said, "I'll come back when you learn not to make everything about you." "What?" I gasped. "You can't, Mom, you can't leave me here." But she already had. She turned, walked back around the front of the Jeep like she was returning a shopping cart. The brake lights blinked once, then faded into the trees like dying stars. The crunch of tires on gravel disappeared, and then nothing. No wheelchair, no phone, no voice, no witness, just me, my broken leg, a bag of God knows what, and a stretch of forest floor colder than grief. It took everything in me not to scream, not because it wouldn't be justified, but because I knew it wouldn't help. I wasn't the screaming type. I'd learned early on that my screams turned into punchlines, drama hysteria. Leona being too much again. They used to call me the meltdown, the mess, the drama queen who couldn't keep it together. It was easier, I suppose, to frame me as the problem than to admit there was a hole in the family's foundation no one wanted to patch. I leaned forward, wrapping my arms around my knees, or what I could manage of them, and let my forehead fall against the soft plaid sleeve of my own coat. The cold was already burrowing under my skin like mold. I reached into my pocket and felt the edge of a photograph. The one thing I kept from Sophie, my little sister. The only one who ever sat beside me during dinners, who once slipped me a tiny hand-drawn card that said, "You're not hard to love." But Sophie left 2 years ago. After Gloria said therapy was a waste of time and love wasn't meant to be coddling. After Sophie stopped getting replies to her texts, I hadn't heard from her since. My breath began to fog in front of me. Night was coming fast. Shadows slid across the dirt like wet ink. I whispered to no one, "Don't let me disappear." That's the thing about being discarded. It isn't just the act. It's the silence that follows the knowing no one is coming. The realization that you've been erased, not by accident, but by intention. Like you were a draft. Someone decided not to publish. The air smelled like pine and rot in winter. My fingers trembled, but I refused to cry. Crying meant they won again. It meant I was still asking for someone to care. I wasn't. Not anymore. I wasn't left in this forest because I was weak. I was left because they thought I wouldn't fight back. It wasn't the cold that hurt the most, not the sting in my leg or the burning in my lungs from crying without making a sound. What hurt was the remembering. And memories have a way of crawling back when you're too weak to shut the door on them. The last time I was truly surrounded by my family, at least in body, if not in heart, was 2 winters ago, just before Sophie left. The house had smelled of burnt rosemary and chicken grease, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes and pretends to be warmth. Gloria had called it a mandatory family dinner, like always. No excuses. Show up and smile. It was never about food. It was about performance. That night, I sat at the edge of the long oak table, my plate untouched. Camille, my older sister, was in rare form, laughing too loudly at things that weren't funny. She had her boyfriend with her, a finance guy with no volume control and an expensive watch that glinted like a threat every time he moved. After dessert, Mom stood abruptly. She held her handbag in one hand, like a prosecutor about to give closing arguments. Her eyes scanned the table, and already my chest tightened. She did that before every accusation built suspense like a showman. $600, she announced, holding the bag slightly higher. Gone. Everyone froze. Camille's boyfriend chuckled nervously, then stopped when no one joined. Gloria's eyes landed on me. I felt the room tilt. "Leona," she said with a voice too calm to be safe. "Did you take it?" My mouth opened, then closed. My fingers dug into the underside of the table. "No," I said. Quiet, but clear. "You sure?" She asked like she hadn't already decided the answer. I wouldn't. "You've been behind on your bills, haven't you?" She cut in. "Medical copays. Rent bus passes to that therapist who convinced you everything's trauma." I glanced around the table, searching for someone, anyone to step in. Jonah, my cousin, avoided my eyes. Camille rolled hers and took a sip of wine. "It always ends up being you, doesn't it?" Mom said like she was commenting on the weather. "The one who needs, the one who drains, the one who turns everything into a crisis." "No one even asked to borrow the bag," I said, trying to hold the shake out of my voice. "That's what's funny," Camille chimed in finally. "No one else has a reason to take it, except you." And there it was, the family's favorite pastime, collapsing truth into assumption until no one remembered what really happened. But I remembered. I remembered walking past Camille's room that afternoon and seeing her slip an envelope into her tote. I remembered the way she didn't flinch when our eyes met, the way she smiled, cool, composed, like she already knew I'd keep quiet. Because I always did, because I knew how this game was played. They didn't want the truth, they wanted a target, and I was the perfect one. The girl who cried too much needed too much, spoke too softly until she didn't, and then spoke too loudly. I was the family's scapegoat, the static in their otherwise polished broadcast. That night I didn't argue. I just went upstairs, heart pounding like it was trying to punch its way out of me. My journal was on my bed, open. My stomach dropped. Then I heard it. Laughter downstairs, my name. And Camille's voice reading, performing from my journal. "Sometimes I feel like I'm screaming into a void and no one in this house hears me," she said in this whispery, tragic actress tone. Laughter Leona, the poet Uncle Barry chimed in. So dramatic, I flew down the stairs. Camille was holding my journal like a playbill. The page she was reading from folded dog-eared was one I'd written the night after my third surgery. I had drawn on it. A weeping willow leaning over a creek as if even the tree was tired of pretending to be strong. Camille looked up. "Oh, here's a gem," she said. "I just want Mom to see me too." She laughed, tossed her hair like this was some sketch comedy. I ripped the notebook from her hands. The pages bent. The binding cracked. No one stopped her. No one stopped me either. Because I was the one causing a scene. Not her. Not them me. That was the last time I wrote in a journal. The last time I drew. The last time I believed that something I created could be mine and safe at the same time, because in that house, even your pain was public property. And when I protested, I became the villain, the unstable one, the emotional landmine no one wanted to get too close to. I curled tighter under the deer stand. Now arms wrapped around the duffel Mom left. I hadn't opened it yet. I didn't want to know what counted as enough for her to feel absolved. The night pressed in thicker, like the forest was remembering too. People think emotional abuse leaves no bruises, but I had been bruised in ways no X-ray could ever explain. And sometimes the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was knowing they would all still sleep soundly that night, convinced they had done the right thing. Because they didn't need me to be bad. They just needed me not to be them. I don't remember when I started crawling. The forest floor was a patchwork of frozen dirt, sharp twigs, and rotting leaves, and my hands were scraped raw within minutes. My right leg dragged behind me uselessly, screaming each time I moved wrong, which was always. But I kept going because if I stopped, I wouldn't start again. About 30 feet ahead, partially hidden beneath a canopy of low branches, stood the outline of an old deer stand. The platform above looked weather-beaten and empty, but the space beneath it offered just enough shelter from the rising wind. I collapsed under it, curled myself into the smallest shape I could manage. My jacket barely covered my knees. My breath fogged the cold air in front of me. I felt like an animal crawling into a grave it had dug for itself. Everything hurt. Not just my body. My body was loud, yes, but it was the kind of hurt I had known before. It was familiar. It was the ache that came with being disposable. I clutched at my coat pocket, fingers searching until they found the soft fabric of a green handkerchief. The last thing Sophie ever gave me. It had her initials stitched in the corner in crooked pink thread S. W. Sophie was my opposite in every way. Sunlight where I was, shadows open where I was quiet, but even she hadn't stayed. Or maybe she had been pushed out the same way I was. Our mother never liked anyone who asked questions or showed softness. Sophie left 2 years ago, stopped replying to messages. Last I heard, she was working somewhere in Oregon. No address, no contact. I held the handkerchief to my lips and closed my eyes. "Don't let this be the last thing I remember," I whispered into the wind. The night didn't answer, but something else did. Snap, a twig cracked somewhere to my right. I froze, heart thudding so loud it felt like a confession. My ears strained. Silence, then rustling. Not the wind, not an animal. Heavy, deliberate. I tried to sit up, but my ankles screamed in protest. I braced myself with a broken branch and shifted just enough to see boots. Worn leather. Thick soles, caked with dried mud. They stood still, watching just beyond the edge of the firelight, except there was no fire. Just the last gray whisper of twilight and my pounding fear. "Hello," I said barely above a whisper. "Please. I need help." The figure stepped forward, slowly. A tall man, broad shoulders, hood up, face shadowed. He crouched beside me without a word, unzipped his backpack, and pulled out a half-empty bottle of water. He handed it to me, then a granola bar, cranberry almond, the wrapper slightly torn. I stared at them, then back at him. Who Who are you? Still nothing. His eyes never met mine. He reached for a small bundle of twigs and dry moss, began stacking them in a circle like he'd done it 1,000 times. With practiced ease, he struck a piece of flint. Sparks danced, a flame caught. Within moments, a small fire flickered between us, casting long orange shadows on the bark behind me. The warmth was surreal. I pressed the water bottle to my lips. It tasted like life. "You're not going to hurt me, are you?" I asked, though I wasn't sure what kind of answer I expected. He didn't answer, but he reached into his bag again, pulled out a thick flannel coat, and draped it over my shoulders, not carelessly gently, like he knew where the cold lived in my body. We sat there in silence. The fire crackled softly. The granola bar disappeared in 3 bites. Hunger was louder than fear now. I watched him, noticed the frayed cuffs of his sleeves, the quiet way he moved like he didn't want to leave footprints in the world. His hands were rough but steady. "How did you find me?" I asked. "Were you following me?" Still nothing. He didn't even shrug. Then, as suddenly as he'd arrived, he stood, tightened his hood, slipped the pack over his shoulder. I reached out instinctively. "Please don't go." But he was already walking into the trees, swallowed by darkness. He never looked back. The fire stayed. The flannel stayed. So did I. The embers cast soft halos of light on the underbrush. I pulled the coat tighter and curled into the crook of my elbow, the handkerchief still in my grip. My fingers trembled not from cold this time, but from something stranger. Something warm. Hope I didn't know who he was or why he didn't speak. But he hadn't laughed. He hadn't accused. He hadn't erased me. He saw a stranger on the edge of dying, and he knelt instead of walking away. Maybe that's all. Hope is a stranger who doesn't turn their back. As the fire dwindled and sleep crawled over me like moss, I whispered one last thing into the night. "Thank you." And for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't say it to someone who had already left. Dawn came slowly, as if unsure whether it was welcome. The first slivers of light filtered through the trees in pale gray strokes brushing against frost-covered leaves and the jagged bark of the stand above me. The fire had long since died, but a whisper of warmth clung to the earth where I slept. My limbs ached from lying on the forest floor, and the coat the stranger had left felt heavier now, like memory, not fabric. I sat up, wincing. My ankle was a throbbing protest. Hunger gnawed again, but more distant this time, like a voice calling from another room. It was quiet, not peaceful, the kind of quiet where you know something is waiting. I didn't plan to move. I didn't plan anything. But something in me shifted when I noticed it, a corner of paper caught under a root near where I had crawled the night before. Crisp, intact, too clean for forest litter. I reached for it with stiff fingers and unfolded it slowly. My breath caught. It was a page from my journal. My handwriting. A sketch of a willow tree drooping, weary its branches trailing into a dark, still creek. I had drawn it at 15 the night Gloria said tears were for people with time to waste. But this page had never left my room. On the back, an unfamiliar handwriting someone had written, "You deserved better. Keep walking." The words hit like a heartbeat, soft but undeniable. I looked around, suddenly unsure of the world's edges. Who had found this? Who had kept it? Who had carried it into these woods, and why? Was it the stranger from last night? A gust of wind pushed at the trees, and in the hush that followed, something shimmered in the dirt. Another fragment of paper. Then another. I followed them. They were scattered like breadcrumbs. Some burnt at the edges, some intact. Others curled in on themselves like they'd tried to disappear and failed. My name appeared on several. A few carried the faint outline of the little sun I used to doodle beside every entry. Then one page stopped me cold. It was whole, neatly folded, unmarked by ash or dirt. Inside was a letter I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. I had written it to myself at 12, folded it into the back of my sketchbook, and hidden it between the floorboards in my closet. "You are not invisible," it read in clumsy, determined scrawl. "You matter, even if no one says it. Keep going." My knees buckled and I sank to the earth, the letter pressed to my chest like armor. The woods blurred around me. Someone had found it. Someone had brought it here. Someone had been watching longer than I knew, not to mock, not to control, but to remember. My fingers trembled as I tucked the page into my coat. This wasn't just a trail. It was a message. I scanned the trees. The branches overhead were thick with frost. But one path caught my eye. A faint trail through the leaves, just visible enough to follow. I limped toward it, dragging my right foot as gently as I could, using a broken limb as a makeshift cane. About a quarter-mile in, tucked behind overgrowth and shadow, stood what looked like an old ranger station, half-collapsed vines spilling over the roof like hair from an open wound. The door was crooked, swinging gently. Inside, dust hung in the air like history. The scent of mildew and pine needles wrapped around me. In one corner sat a wooden crate, and on top of it, a laptop, scuffed old but glowing. A solar charger lay across the cracked window. I moved toward it, cautious. The screen was open to a blog dashboard. My name sat in the search bar, and below it a list of anonymous posts. Dozens. I clicked one. She was never weak. They just needed her to believe she was. They erased her in the living room, at the dinner table, in birthday photos. They called her dramatic when she told the truth. But I remember her voice, her drawings, the way she made grief feel human. I scrolled further. Another post dated 6 months ago. If no one listens to her story, I will. I'll remember every page they tried to burn. I leaned against the wall, hand over my mouth. Every journal entry, every sketch, every private cry, they hadn't vanished. Someone had been collecting them, archiving them, holding space for the version of me I'd been taught to bury, not for attention, not for spectacle, for witnessing. That word echoed through my chest like a bell. Someone saw me. Not the version Camille rolled her eyes at, not the girl Gloria insisted was too much, not the burden, not the failure. Me, I thought of the boy from high school, Elijah, the one who always sat in the back of the library, who once slipped me a book of poetry instead of asking for my number. He used to ask about my drawings, about the trees. Could it be him? I closed the laptop gently and stepped outside again. The cold bit harder now, but it didn't feel cruel. It felt like a reminder. Just beyond the clearing, I saw movement, a figure partially hidden behind trees. They didn't approach, didn't wave, just stood there, watching. I didn't feel fear. This time, I felt seen. I raised the old journal page in my hand and held it to my heart. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be witnessed. I didn't expect to find a town after the woods, after the fire, after the blog and the trail of ashes that used to be my voice. I didn't expect streetlights, sidewalks, or the quiet hum of civilization. But the path led me forward through underbrush and fallen branches until I emerged near a cracked stretch of road that once had white lines. A narrow bridge stretched across a creek swollen with meltwater. On the other side, buildings huddled together like secrets, modest, peeling alive. A hand-painted sign read, West Briar, no zip code. Just that. I crossed the bridge like someone walking between dimensions. My boots thudded softly on the planks, the cold biting at my cheeks, the wind tugging at the frayed coat the stranger had left behind. The same coat that still carried the scent of pine and smoke and something older care. The kind that doesn't speak but acts. At the end of the street stood a gas station with a flickering neon sign. Open it lied. The glass door was locked. Beside it, a shop called The Bookmark had a chalkboard out front. Used books. Fresh coffee. Lost souls. Welcome. I wanted to laugh, I almost did. Then I saw the diner. It sat on the corner, glowing like a memory that pretends to be warmth. windows fogged with breath and heat, booths filled with locals, forks scraping plates, coffee being poured. It looked like the kind of place where people came for comfort and stayed because they didn't want to go home yet. I was going to walk past. I swear I was. But something, a glance, a pull. Maybe just fate being cruel made me look, and when I did, my breath locked in my throat. Them inside, clear as crystal, sat my family Gloria, regal as ever in her ivory shawl. Camille, perfectly made up, gesturing mid-laugh, Connor scrolling his phone between bites, Gerald, their quiet audience, nodding along like a man who'd sold his conscience for comfort. They were eating fries, sharing fries, laughing, joking. Like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't been left to die 2 nights ago. Like I didn't exist. Gloria lifted her glass white wine, of course, and said in a voice too smooth to be casual. She ran off again. Said she needed space. You know how she gets. Camille smirked, picked a fry from the center of the table. Classic. Leona always ruins everything. They all chuckled. Even Connor, whose only words to me in months had been, chill, no tension, no worry, no sign they'd called the police, no missing posters, not even a hint that someone might be wondering if I was dead in a ditch, because they weren't wondering. They knew. They had planned it. And now they were sitting under soft lights, sipping wine and rewriting the ending. Without me in it, I stood frozen outside the window, just a girl in the cold watching her own erasure happen in real time. No one saw me. No one except one. River. She sat at the edge of the booth, a paper napkin crumpled between her fingers, her face pale under the diner's glow. Her posture was wrong, too, still too tight. Her hands shook just slightly. And then she looked up. Her eyes met mine. For a second time, went still. The laughter disappeared. The world narrowed to a pane of glass and 2 pairs of eyes. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She mouthed 2 words. I'm sorry. And I knew she meant it. I remembered now. River lingering in the hallway weeks ago just outside the kitchen when Gloria and Camille had been whispering about Final Chance's boundaries and how Leona needs a wake-up call. She had heard something enough to know, but she'd said nothing. Maybe she didn't know what to do. Maybe she thought it wouldn't really happen, or maybe silence had just been easier. I looked away before she could say anything more, because her apology, however genuine, wouldn't undo what they did. I turned and walked, boots thudding dully against the pavement. My legs ached, my breath shallow. The warmth from the diner behind me felt like a betrayal. I didn't cry. That version of me begging for someone to see her had already been buried. They dug the grave. I just refused to lie down. 3 blocks later, I found a rusted bus shelter. The bench was slanted, the plexiglass walls smeared with years of dust and weather. I sat. Let the coat fall around me like a curtain. Let my bones settle into their grief. Above me, the sky pulsed soft purple, the last of day folding into dusk. Maybe they're right, I whispered to no one. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe disappearing is the only thing I was ever good at. But even as the words left my mouth, something inside me twitched like an old ember catching wind. The same part of me that once wrote poems under the covers, that drew willow trees with weeping branches when words weren't safe, that held on to a green handkerchief like it was a lifeline. The part that refused to be forgotten. I leaned back, the metal creaking beneath me. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the end of the version of me they could control, and that for the first time in my life felt like the beginning of something real. The shelter didn't ask questions. That's why I went. A rust-colored brick building just off the main road, its sign barely visible behind a dying maple tree. No cameras, no intake form with too many boxes, just a woman at the front desk with a tired smile who offered me oatmeal and a shower. "What's your name, honey?" she asked gently. "May," I said. "I don't know why I chose it." Maybe because it didn't belong to anyone in my past. It felt soft, unwritten. She nodded, as if she knew not to press. That first night, I slept in a bunk near the back. The room was filled with whispers, mothers humming lullabies, children sniffling in their sleep. The rustle of blankets being pulled tighter against the cold. It was the kind of place where silence had weight, but not violence. I didn't speak, I didn't cry. I just breathed shallow and steady, like someone trying to prove they were still here. By the third morning, the woman at the desk said, "I could stay longer if I wanted." I nodded. I didn't want to go anywhere, but I needed to move. My body was aching from stillness, so I wandered. The town was small, wood-paneled storefronts, a single bus line, telephone poles decorated with yarn-bombed hearts. No one knew my name, no one looked twice. And then just before noon, I saw the bookmark again. The bookstore I had passed earlier, the one with the chalkboard sign. I stepped inside. A bell jingled overhead. The scent hit me instantly. Old paper dust and something warm. Maybe cinnamon or nostalgia. The place looked like it hadn't been updated in 20 years. Wooden shelves bowed under the weight of too many stories. A cat dozed on a stack of poetry near the window. Behind the counter sat an old man with wire-framed glasses, squinting at a crossword. He looked up. "Cold out there." I nodded. "Just browsing." He tilted his head. "You're Leona, aren't you?" My breath stalled. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, voice shaking. "You must be mistaking me for someone else." But the man was already standing, walking toward the back room. "Your father," he called over his shoulder, "asked me to give you something. If you ever came through." I didn't move. "Couldn't. My legs locked?" He returned holding a parcel wrapped in brown paper tied with a frayed piece of string. It was thick, worn soft with age, and on the front in shaky ink it read, "For Leona when you're ready, Dad." I took it with trembling hands. Mr. Walsh brought that in just before. "Well, he said you might never come, but if you did, I should make sure you got it." He didn't say anything else, didn't try to explain. He just went back to his crossword. I sat on a bench by the front window and opened the package slowly, like it might break if I rushed. Inside was a leather-bound journal, old, cracking at the spine. Dozens of pages, all filled in, slanted, restless handwriting. His handwriting. "Leona, if you're reading this, it means you found your way back to yourself. I hope this is how I finally reach you." I flipped through the pages. There were birthday messages I'd never received. Letters he'd written every year since I was 5. Sketches of trees of willow branches of me in pigtails with missing teeth. He remembered my drawings. Tucked between the pages were copies of court transcripts, custody filings, letters returned unopened. "She says you're not ready," he wrote. "But I know that's not true. You were always more ready than anyone gave you credit for. She's keeping you from me, and no one believes it. But I do. I believe you. I always have." My vision blurred. The words smudged under my fingertips. "He never forgot me," I whispered. "They just erased him. All my life I'd been told he left, that he didn't want me, that he had moved on, that he was weak, unstable. Someone better kept out of the picture." But it wasn't true. He fought. He screamed into silence. He tried. And I never knew. I held the journal to my chest, curling around it like it might fall apart if I let go. In the corner of the bookstore, the cat stirred, stretching lazily. Outside, the wind picked up scattering leaves across the pavement. But inside, everything was still. I stayed there for hours. The clerk didn't ask me to buy anything, didn't rush me, just let me sit in the safety of a story that hadn't been stolen. I read every word I memorized, the slant of his letters, the way he signed every page with a quiet hope. "Love you always, Dad." That night, I didn't go back to the shelter. I walked until my legs gave out, until the stars blinked above me like quiet witnesses I had been loved, maybe not loudly, maybe not publicly, but truly. And that somehow changed everything. The gallery sat on the edge of the arts district, small, converted from an old train station with iron beams still visible in the ceiling like skeletal remnants of its past life. It didn't look like a place where revolutions happened, but for me, it was a battleground. I'd submitted the piece anonymously. The instructions had been clear. No names, no bios, just art. A showcase for emerging voices, the gallery said. Let the work speak before the artist does. So I let it. The painting was tall, 5 feet, maybe more. The colors were muted, deliberate gray, violet, bruised blue. In the center, a girl stood behind a pane of glass. Her hands pressed flat against it, her mouth open in a scream, but no sound reached the viewer. Around her, shadows shaped like people turned away, laughing, sipping wine, adjusting their collars. I called it the Forgotten Room, because every family has one. The room where the truth gets locked away, where someone is hidden so everyone else can stay comfortable. I didn't attend the opening reception. I watched from the far back corner, standing behind a pillar cluttered with promotional flyers and sponsor logos. My hair was longer now, my coat cleaner. I moved without the limp. Mostly, no one looked twice. The room filled slowly. Conversations buzzed like a beehive. Laughter, camera shutters, murmurs of critique. And then, just before the spotlight tour began, they walked in. Gloria, Camille Connor, Gerald, even River. They looked exactly as they always had, perfectly composed, impeccably dressed, completely unaware. Camille wore heels too high for the cracked floor tiles, tottering slightly as she sipped white wine and whispered comments to Gerald, who nodded and chuckled on cue. Gloria had her shawl again, the ivory one she wore when she needed to look both vulnerable and important. They didn't recognize me, but I recognized everything about them. They made their rounds, scoffed at the abstract installations, complimented a sculpture they clearly didn't understand. Then they stopped in front of my painting. Camille tilted her head. Weird, she said, eyes narrowing. This feels familiar. Gloria chuckled, not even bothering to whisper. These sad little artists, they think silence is a personality trait. Her voice hit me like static through an old radio, distorted but unmistakable. The same cadence she used the night she left me in the woods. The same tone she used when she called me too much. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. The gallery host stepped up to the microphone, tapping it gently. Thank you all for joining us at this year's Emerging Voices Showcase. We believe every piece here tells a story, but tonight will also reveal the voices behind those stories. He walked the room slowly, calling out names. Artists stepped forward. Applause followed each reveal. And then he stopped at mine. And this, he said, gesturing to my painting, is The Forgotten Room by Leona Walsh. The silence was instant. Thick, it didn't fall. It cracked like ice underfoot. I heard it before I saw it. Glass shattering. Camille's wine glass had slipped from her fingers, stem snapping as it hit the polished concrete. Wine pooled around her heels, blooming like a stain no one could scrub out. Gloria's mouth opened, but no sound came, and I stepped forward, not from the shadows, from the truth. I didn't smile. I didn't pose. I just walked, boots clicking softly, until I stood beside my painting. Then I looked them in the eye, all of them. And I said, calm and quiet, you said no one would ever listen to me. Tonight. They stared at my pain for 20 minutes, and not one of them looked away. No one moved. No one breathed. Because for once they weren't in control of the narrative. The gallery murmured around us, soft waves of realization breaking across the crowd. Strangers looked at me, some in awe, some in sympathy, others with anger, but not at me. River's eyes filled. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. Camille's lips twitched like she wanted to lash out, but there were too many witnesses now. Gloria's face was pale, almost gray. She clutched her shawl tighter as if wrapping it could undo what she heard, but it couldn't, because this wasn't her room anymore. It was mine. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't wait for their response. I turned and walked out. Past the curator, past the flyer wall, past the echo of footsteps trying to follow. Outside snow had begun to fall. Slow, heavy flakes that clung to my coat to the sidewalk. To the silence I carried like armor. For the first time, I wasn't hiding, I wasn't shouting either. I had spoken, I had been heard, and sometimes that's what justice looks like. Not courtroom gavel, not revenge, not apology, just truth seen. 3 weeks after the gallery, I boarded a bus to Oregon. A nonprofit had reached out someone who'd seen The Forgotten Room online. They ran an arts-based recovery program for children who'd lived through trauma. They asked if I'd be willing to help lead a group, just to sit with them, maybe show them what clay can become. I didn't hesitate. The center was small, tucked behind a library and across from a food co-op that sold more intention than produce. The windows were painted with murals, sunflowers, waves, stars, all drawn by children whose homes had never felt like homes. I arrived early that morning wrapped in a scarf that didn't match and still wearing the coat the stranger had left me. I kept it clean now, repaired the seams. Didn't hide the wear. It had saved me once. Inside, the room smelled like acrylic paint, glue sticks, and possibility. The tables were covered in brown paper, water cups filled brushes already shedding. The kids trickled in slowly, 10, maybe 15. Some came in loud, demanding attention. Others slid into chairs like they hoped no one would notice. I saw myself in each of them. Halfway through the hour, a girl with tightly braided hair and eyes too old for her face took a seat at the corner table. She said nothing, just picked up a black crayon and began to draw. I knelt beside her. "What are you working on?" I asked gently. She didn't answer, but after a moment, she pushed the paper toward me. It showed a crooked little house with a shadow figure hiding behind a refrigerator. I recognized the shape instantly, the shrinking, the silence. "Is that you?" I asked. She nodded once. I hesitated, then asked if you could come out. "What would it look like?" She stared at the paper. Then wordlessly, she flipped it over, dipped her brush in yellow, and painted a sun. Clumsy, uneven, radiant. We sat together in that quiet, her brush strokes, slow, deliberate, and something shifted inside me. Not a scream, not a collapse, just a soft realignment, like hope being passed between hands. That evening, as lavender dusk stretched itself across the sky, I walked home to the studio I now rented above a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon and flour. The windows fogged in the morning. The wood floors creaked like they were telling secrets. I dropped my bag, pulled off my coat, and checked my email out of habit. One new message. From Gloria Walsh, subject, "Enough." I stared at it for a long moment before clicking. There was no greeting, no warmth, no question. Just one sentence. "Enough. You're making us look bad." No apology, no curiosity if I was okay, just image management. Just the same old script. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage either. Just release? She was still trying to control the narrative, but it didn't belong to her anymore. I closed the email. Didn't respond. Didn't delete it either. I let it sit there unanswered. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's sovereignty. I walked to the back of the studio where my tools waited. Clay spinning wheel heat lamp dust. The quiet hum of becoming. That night I sculpted something I hadn't dared to before. A phoenix. Porcelain white wings stretched one side, fractured visibly. I didn't hide the crack. I sealed it in gold, a technique I'd learned from a Japanese restoration style called kintsugi. The idea that broken things become more beautiful, not despite their damage, but because of it. The wing looked stronger with the seam exposed. I placed the bird atop a branch charred cracked as if it had survived a fire it never expected to endure. When I finished, I signed the base, not with initials, not anonymously, just one name. Leona Walsh. Days later, the piece sat beside the forgotten room in the gallery's newly dedicated wing. The plaque below it read, "Not everything broken stays broken." I didn't tell anyone I was the one who made it. I didn't need to. Because art, like healing, isn't about being seen by everyone, just by someone. The next morning, I wandered through a thrift store on the edge of town, more from habit than purpose. My fingers trailed over scarves, books, ceramic mugs. And then they stopped. A porcelain bird. The same kind my mother shattered the night she accused me of stealing. I picked it up, held it lightly in my hand, felt the old ache stir. Then I put it back on the shelf. Didn't need it, didn't want it. Some things don't need fixing, they just need letting go. Outside, the sun was rising soft and golden, slipping through the trees like an old friend. I pulled my scarf tighter, stepped into the morning, and walked toward the future, not as the girl they left in the woods, not as the daughter they silenced, but as the woman who kept walking anyway.